This is Steve.
And this is Scott from Origin of Speakeasies.
Do you have a beard? Do you like craft beer?
Oh, you're listening to a podcast, so odds are yes.
We're very happy to tell you about our new sponsor, Brewville, our choice for craft beer to go.
At Brewville, you can stock up on your favorite craft beers and take them home with you.
Brewville has more than 40 craft beers on tap for you, including beers from local Richmond breweries such as Ardent, Triple Crossing, and Hardywood.
You pick the beers you want and take them home with you in growlers or crowlers.
To clarify, crowlers are canned growlers, not a fancy donut.
If you need beer for your summer cookout or pool party, Brewville is the place for you.
Brewville is located minutes from downtown Richmond, just a mile north off 295 in Hanover, in the Rutland Commons Shopping Center between Kroger and Marty's Grill.
And as a Speakeasies listener, for a limited time, you can receive 10% off your purchase by saying Speakeasies at checkout. To learn more about Brewville and the beers they currently have on tap, go to brewvilleva.com. That's brewvilleva.com.
And don't forget to tell them Speakeasies when you check out to save 10%.
Brewville, your choice for craft beer to go.
So my nephew and I decided to go see John Wick 3 the other day. So we meet up first. We're trying to figure out somewhere by the movie theater to meet up, and I suggest a couple places. He picks, Buffalo Wild. Should we not say the restaurant name? Should we say it?
I think we should say it.
Yeah, because what are they going to do?
I mean,
I'd love to see the legal...
It depends on what we're going to say.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not going to get too bad. Buffalo Wild Wings is like the girl in high school that was hot during high school, but didn't realize that she wasn't going to be hot forever. Didn't really develop herself as a person. So, because Buffalo Wild Wings, they're good when they come in. They're good for a little bit, is, man. But there's one that's near here that's been remodeled a million times, and it just you can't paint over that turd anymore. So we were there briefly. Do you remember the song from the early '90s, "The Power"?
Yes. That
came on. So my much younger nephew looked at me and was like, "Let's go," and I'm like, "Yeah, let's go."
They played that song
there, yeah.
I haven't heard that song since 7th grade.
We'll go back to Buffalo Wild Wings. Here. So we walk over to another restaurant in the complex that was a former Fridays.
Oh, so y'all left?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I know exactly where y'all are. What happened to that Fridays, man?
So it's now.
Wait a minute. That was the Fridays where we had the Dark Knight.
That is, and I've. After being in there, that'll tie back around to that there in a moment. So Fridays, even though this place isn't a Fridays, I feel like the spirit of it still haunts it. And what I've realized, Friday is the girl in high school that was hot only because she was dirty. Like she really wasn't attractive,
right? But
she was out there like really early on, like making her own, putting on way too much makeup, making her own cutoffs. But definitely Fridays is the girl that was hot in high school.
You're really good at this, is it?
And it really hits. So what I realized after going in there, so my nephew was turned off by the early '90s faux hip hop. So we walk in and sit down. Well, we're greeted by someone. This place is now a beer focused restaurant.
I have not been there. But...
Yeah. So the guy that comes in is almost in a guy serving beer outfit, like tight t-shirt,
right? Really
overlong beard.
Yeah.
Saying some important things about things being hoppy.
Yeah.
When he sits us down, like he's been trained well.
Right.
And then as soon as he sits down and we're laughing about, or we sit down and we're laughing about the song we heard the last place.
Right.
Then Rum Shaker cuts on.
So good.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So I thought that it came back to the spirit of Fridays. I'm like, I had a feeling when Fridays sold them, I was like, well, you can take this over, but our soundtrack still has to play.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because when we were there, the night of the Dark Knight, is this what you're talking about? When we bring it back around, I specifically remember there was a DJ in that TGI Fridays, and he played Poison. I very specifically remember that.
Yeah,
so
not the Alice Cooper Poison.
No,
BBD.
Speaking of BBD, so we've talked a little bit before about Conway Twitty and his. Making babies music and all that. It's some of his lyrics can be a little questionable, but it's nothing like BBD. Do you know that BBD had a song called "Do Me"? Are you aware of the lyrics of that song?
And for some reason, I heard that recently, and it might have been at the same restaurant. There are some things that are just blatantly illegal that are discussed
Yeah, and we can leave it at that.
Yeah.
I just know that you get tired of, you hear Poison all the time by Bell Biv DeVoe.
Mm-hmm.
You go, well, wait a minute. They had some other hits. I Thought It Was Me was a hit, which is a fine hit. And then Do Me, which, right in the title, it's not going to be PG.
Right.
But you're right. It gets explicitly illegal.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they get away with that.
Yeah, and this is blatantly illegal. It's like basically, let's describe doing something that's against the law.
It reads like an affidavit or like or some sort of court transcript.
It does.
You were backstage. She was underage.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? Fine.
Yeah.
She replied. It's
yeah. I need a body bag. Is how that
exactly.
ends. But it has a nice New Jack beat to it. I've also decided that Rum Shaker by Rex in Effect should be the national anthem of Virginia Beach. Everyone should salute and twerk.
It's not a bad thing. I'm down. I want to start the campaign for that.
Yeah. Just make it official because it pretty much is.
We should make it official. And by the way, speaking of official, I know it's only May. Mm-hmm. I'm already looking forward to Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. So we're going to make Rum Shaker the official anthem of Virginia Beach. Yeah. And in Thanksgiving, we declared an official movie of Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah. Roadhouse. And
I'm looking forward to, we're going to talk more about Roadhouse.
Yeah.
And potentially have some more guests because I don't know about you, but I've definitely been hearing from folks that want to talk about Roadhouse. So
yeah. Well, who doesn't? So John Wick 3, I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but I'll give a very concise spoiler-free review. So as something that's not a spoiler is John Wick is going to shoot people in the face.
Right.
That's a given. I will give John Wick 3 credit for the director sat around and spent some time thinking. It's like, all right, we know people are going to be murdered in their face. Right. What are some other ways we could do that? And they, without me being sarcastic, they did a really good job of finding other ways for people to get murdered in their face. And they
really?
It's a great movie. Highly recommend.
Is this the one? So I've seen the first one multiple times. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I haven't seen the second one. That's on me. But
guess what?
Yeah.
Guess what happens?
Well, I imagine he shoots people in the face.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome to Origin of Speaksies. I'm Scott here with my friend Steve. And all right, tonight, Steve, are you ready?
I'm ready.
We're going to talk about Mexico. Mexican idioms. And we've done a lot of different countries.
Yeah, we've mostly been focused in Europe.
In Europe.
And I think also when we do these idioms, we always do a very positive view on it. I remember we discussed the Dutch. Yeah. We enjoyed learning about them and their culture. We recently did one involving Sweden.
Yeah.
So now we get a chance to bring it over to our side of the globe.
Mexico. I love Mexican food. I love... So anyway... Mexico, and we've done Sweden, we've done Dutch stuff, and so now we're going to talk about Mexican. So I was thinking the other day about one, and I guess before I get into the first idiom for tonight,
well, the concern that we both have is that we want to make sure that this isn't done in a way that's denigrating to any culture or people.
Thank you.
And it's one of those things that we always want to be positive, as long as we're not talking about it. Because no one likes them.
Oh.
I mean, fuck those guys. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
No, I agree.
But anyway, sorry, I don't want positive Steve.
I know. It's almost as bad as, who did your friend dislike? The Welsh?
Oh, the Welsh.
Yeah. They're I'd say not as bad as them. But...
Oh, they're the worst. I think if anything, if we ever needed to do a racist podcast, we could bring everyone together by doing one about them.
Okay, well, good. Well, I'm glad. Anyway. It makes me feel better. I don't know. Yeah. It's a lot of vitriol toward, but but on the other hand, it makes me feel a little bit better about talking about Mexican idioms because, listen, there's a lot of good stuff in Mexico,
and they're not.
No, so again, like they have the food is fantastic.
Yeah. Warm climate.
The climate is amazing.
Sammy Hagar lives there sometimes.
Yeah. So, all right. So Mexican Standoff.
Standoff.
I absolutely love this one. Mm-hmm. It's something that I've heard forever. And I don't know, man. It just conjures up really cool images for me.
It's very cinematic.
I kind of know what it means. Like, well, I know what a standoff means, right? So, but then I'm like, well, what is a Mexican standoff? And I'm like, I've heard this in popular culture. There's actually a really cool song by a band called Elbow. It's called Mexican Standoff, and he's talking about being in a car, looking at some other guy, but it just sounds cool. A Mexican Standoff. So in context, it's something I've sort of figured out that it means it's something feudal, like nobody's going to win, nobody's going to budge. And I think partially because of that Elbow song, I've always pictured like two cars in a lane pointing each other, and nobody's going to move, and they're just going to sit there. No idea why it's called Mexican. So before I get into some more Mexican standoff talk, is it something you've used? Is it something like, what does that conjure for you?
For me, it conjures up a situation where you have people have guns drawn on each other, and it's not even like a one-on-one. There's like three separate parties. It's a standoff where the options aren't good. Right. And it's very cinematic sounding, and it just conjures up a vision of tension. And it's not just like, we're disagreeing on where we're going to eat. Things are getting intense. There could be bloodshed over that. It's a phrase I wouldn't say I use frequently, but I use it enough that the context makes sense. When I use it, generally I'm not in too many situations where guns have been drawn, but there's been things when it's like a tense decision and we've kind of reached a deadlock. We'll talk about we're at a Mexican standoff, and I wonder if this gets away from what you're trying to get at.
No,
I think one of the things about it just sounds cool.
Yeah,
it has a good cadence. It sounds. Sometimes you'll see things that you'll put a country. You'll say Mexican this or that. That's kind of. Yeah. It's not respect, so it's pejorative. But Mexican standoff sounds cool. Like, I think it's used in a very positive way. It's something that just the way you say it and the flow of it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that just the cadence of it and the Mexican standoff, it rolls off the tongue beautifully. I don't think it's any, and we joked around about, is it racist, is it not? I mean, there are definitely, let's get this out of the way.
Right.
There are definitely racist, I mean, objectively speaking, there are racist things you could say, Mexican this, Mexican that, that means something just like inferior.
Yeah, and it was kind of like when we did research on the Dutch idioms from, after years ago, the English would have Dutch as a pejorative to describe something.
In fact, it's funny you say that, because as I was researching this, it was like, they actually specifically mentioned things like how the Dutch in Europe, it's the same thing with how sometimes the Mexican, and then put whatever you want to put behind it as a burn. Same thing with the Dutch. They talk about Dutch treat, which meant you had to pay for yourself because the Dutchman wasn't going to pay for you. So this isn't, I don't believe this is that.
No.
From everything I've read, it's more toward it kind of sounds cool, but I also think this is another relatively new expression. And when I think of a Mexican standoff, I think of Sergio Leone. I think of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And the scene that I remember watching that as a kid, and it seems like it takes about an hour, but it's only about 2.5 minutes. But you have Clint Eastwood, who is just looking as cool as can be with his little cigarillo in there, and then he's holding a gun up, and then Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef, the other actor, are all facing each other at gunpoint. It goes on for a couple minutes, and then eventually one of them drops their gun, but they're all standing there, and the whole conceit is, as you mentioned earlier, there's no way out of this. If I shoot the guy I want to shoot, the other guy's going to shoot me, and the other guy, so everyone's going to die. Right. So what's different? So I think when you talk about Mexican standoff, there's two questions you address. Like, one is, what's the difference between just a standoff and a Mexican standoff? And then the second part is, why Mexican?
I think Mexican standoff, part of it is it sounds cool, and it's, it goes with that. I wonder also if you had mentioned the Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Around the same time, the movie The Wild Bunch came out. Sam Peckinpah's, which is a great film, extremely violent, hyper violent, that actually concludes with in Mexico, and concludes with what we would describe as a Mexican standoff in the climactic scene. So that could have something to be an influence too, of it being cinematic and also literally occurring in Mexico.
So based on everything I read about this, a couple things about this one is this isn't one that points back to a specific. We're not going to be able to point back and say this is where it comes from. There are people that say it's a part of our shameful American history of being racist. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that with this one. Okay. I think there are other things. And then there are people that say it has to do with Mexican bandits in the, early days of America, the frontier days of bandits, that they wouldn't fight fairly, Mexican bandits. And so you call it a Mexican standoff. I don't believe that either. And that kind of plays into the racist notion. Yeah. I think it's what you're talking about, which is it sounds better than just a standoff, but then also there are movies like The Wild Bunch and these spaghetti westerns and the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where there are actual standoffs with pistols, that are either in Mexico or Mexicans are involved, and it sounds a lot cooler when you're trying to use it as an idiom or use it as a metaphor when you're describing a situation to say, "Oh man, this is a standoff." Mm-hmm. No, this is a Mexican standoff. All of a sudden, it sounds amazing. I'll give you a good example of that, which is in so one of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is, I don't know if I can't speak to say it's his favorite film, but certainly a huge influence on Quentin Tarantino. Mm-hmm. And if you ever go back and watch, like I hadn't seen The Good, and Bad, and the Ugly for a few years, and watching some of it, which, by the way, as an aside, I don't know about you as you research and prepare for these episodes, do you ever get to tell your wife, like, honey, I'm doing research, and you're like watching clips of like movies or like listening to ABBA? I
do actually, and it comes up always, like my child comes up to see me, wants to know what I'm doing, and I'm doing research, which is she is certainly going to take that's Daddy's excuse to look at his phone.
Yeah, I thought about that because today I was surreptitiously watching these videos, and it wasn't, I wasn't explaining it to my, like, I don't have a wife, so I wasn't explaining it to my wife, but I was thinking, I have had to tell my kids a bunch of times, I'm doing podcast stuff, or I'm researching for the podcast, and you're sitting there watching videos or whatever. But anyway, so as I was doing that, boy, you watch that scene, that Mexican standoff scene, and you think you're watching a Tarantino movie. Like, that's been one of the criticisms of Tarantino, is that he's too derivative, or he's just doing, is pastiche the right word?
I think derivative in his sense is probably better, because he's one of those guys that I when I was younger I really liked, and the older I get and more when I see his inspirations are sometimes just direct rip-offs of things.
Well, if you watch that scene, you will think, I couldn't believe, I said, oh my gosh, this is exactly, it reminded me of The Bride in Kill Bill, and a scene where she's in the desert and it's just zoom in, it's loud music, and it's exactly what Tarantino does. Now, I'll say, to me, I am still a huge fan, and I can't wait till his movies come out. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's coming out, but it got me thinking about Mexican standoffs, and there's a line, and so to go to this whole idea of how cool it sounds is the Inglourious Bastards, which is one of my favorites. I don't know, I can't really rank his movies because I change my mind all the time, but it is a great movie. And there's a scene where there are actually two Mexican standoffs in Inglourious Bastards, but the one I enjoy the most is the one where they're down in the little underground cafe in the basement.
Right.
You remember that one? So it's right after Michael Fassbender gets killed, and Brad Pitt's character, Lieutenant Aldo Raines, calls down. And so this guy, Wilhelm, he's got the Bridget von Hammerstein, got a pistol to her. And he's saying, hey, drop your weapon. And the guy's like, no, I'm not going to drop my weapon. And he goes, and so Brad Pitt says something to the effect of like, if you don't drop your weapon, it's a Mexican standoff, and that's not what the deal was. And anyway, he goes on talking about how he can drop a grenade in there, which would then make it a Mexican standoff. Yeah. So,
hey, Willie, what's with the machine gun? I thought we had us a deal.
We do have a deal. Now get the gun and go.
Not so fast. We only got a deal. We trust each other. And a Mexican standoff ain't trust.
Whoa. You need guns on me for it to be a Mexican standoff.
You got guns on us. You decide to shoot, we're dead. Up top, they got grenades. They drop them down here, you're dead. That's a Mexican standoff, and that was not the deal. No trust, no deal.
But anyway, Tarantino has done this in a ton of movies.
I think every movie.
Probably
I think
every
that's
movie.
One of his ones. One of my favorite Quentin Tarantino movies is actually one he didn't direct. So I don't know if this counts in his official litany, but True Romance, where he wrote the screenplay for, and is a very Quentin Tarantino movie.
Right.
And that's one I think that stood up a little bit better throughout time, and at least in my opinion, is one of my favorite ones. It's got Gary Oldman as a pimp. It's got Val Kilmer as Elvis.
Can I tell you something? I've never seen True Romance.
Really?
I've never seen it.
Okay.
I've seen Reservoir Dogs 25 times, and I've never seen True Romance.
So you've never seen the Sicilian scene then?
I've never seen the movie.
Okay.
So if
well,
that's
good.
in it,
well, that's something that we will explore.
So I'm so glad of all the ones you brought up. I have such a connection to all the other ones. So I was hoping that would be the one you brought up, because I somehow have never seen it. Who else stars? Who is it? Who's like the main guy star in it?
Christian Slater.
Christian Slater. That's probably why I didn't see it.
Yeah, that's an acceptable reason.
And honestly, that's not trying to be funny. I just have no interest in Christian Slater movies, but I know he's written it and I need to watch it. But Reservoir Dogs to me is the classic one. So we can talk about, Pulp Fiction, the Sam Jackson, Tim Roth, Honey Bunny in the cafe right at the beginning of the movie. That's there. We talked about Inglourious Bastards and Kill Bill. But the one in Reservoir Dogs, which is the one that like every dorm room poster had, because it was Mr. Orange, Mr. White. So it was Tim Roth, who also was in the Pulp Fiction one, who is the undercover cop. He's shot in the stomach. Remember that?
Yeah.
And he's down there. And then Harvey Keitel, Mr. White, is defending him. And then Joe comes in, Chris Penn, realizing that he's the cop, and they're all standing there. And they end up all shooting each other and dying. So, so tying it back to the idiom, that's the idea with the Mexican standoff that changes it from a standoff. So a standoff is something that, you and I could get into a standoff where we don't want to budge on something.
Right.
But eventually one of us budges.
Yeah. Generally, there's not going to be a gut shot either.
Well, no.
It depends. Maybe if we're at TGI Fridays.
That's exactly. The wrong song comes on.
Yeah.
But one of us will get a little too pumped up if the Virginia Beach anthem comes on.
Yeah.
But it's the difference with a Mexican standoff. After everything I've read, my conclusion is a couple things. One, it's you can't back out from it. Like you can't. Right. You're in it. Like you're something is going to happen here. Something bad.
There'll be a definitive conclusion.
Yes, and the other thing is, it's a. Nobody has an advantage in the situation, and most likely something bad's gonna happen to everyone. So that's not always the case. I mean, you see examples of a Mexican standoff where that's not the case. But
it makes me think of situations where something bad's gonna happen to everybody, regardless. Even if guns aren't involved, it's probably when you go to Fridays or BW3. There's gonna be
absolutely
something, and that actually might lead into our other idiom.
It absolutely will. Let me just wrap up, because I do feel like we do need to, if we get through an idiom without throwing out some older date with when it was used, it just wouldn't be an episode. So I'll quote this from Grammarist. The first iteration of Mexican standoff was from 1840s, and it was described as, like I said before, the tendency of Mexican bandits to run away from a fair fight. And then in the 1890s, Mexican standoff was referred to a standoff that ended with no shots fired and no satisfactory resolution. Let me just say this. I didn't find the research for this, so I don't know, but that's what they're saying here. But then it starts going into the Western novels and Western movies in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And really, this is what this thing is all about, what we talked about. So whatever that old stuff is, what I'm trying to say is we're not racist for talking about this.
Yeah, definitely. Right? And we've proved that with you.
And as we said before, they're not as bad as...
Yeah, we're definitely not being racist.
Yeah.
Because if we were, we'd talk about and how much we hate them, and everybody hates them. I mean, that's just kind of a given.
Yeah, exactly. So, as Steve alluded to, if you do spend a lot of time in a TGI Fridays or a Chili's, you may end up with Montezuma's Revenge.
Montezuma's Revenge.
Yes. So, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, you can probably guess the etymology of this one. It's not going to shock you, but this is going to be a nice, fun few minutes where we get to make very lowbrow jokes.
We're going to try to make bathroom jokes, but keep it PG-13.
Yeah, it's all PG-13.
So good. So when you told me about this, it made me think of one of my favorite quotes from the actor Fred Willard in the movie Waiting for Guffman, which he's a travel agent discussing a trip with a client. And he tells him that Montezuma's Revenge is nothing more than good old-fashioned American diarrhea.
But it's true. It's
so
true because one of the so here's what tickled me about, I don't know if that's the right word I should use, about Montezuma's Revenge. Everybody knows what it is. It's good old-fashioned diarrhea. So let's just get that out there. Yeah. But as I looked this up, all of the other terms for it are pretty great. Mm-hmm. So I bet you think what I'm going to do right now is give you a big history on Montezuma. Guess what? I'm not, because you can do that on your own. Just Google it. We're gonna do diarrhea jokes. So you know what the technical term for Montezuma's Revenge is? It's very close to Fred Willard, what he said, which is traveler's diarrhea. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to, on the outside chance you don't know what we're talking about. Yeah. Montezuma was obviously you've probably heard of him, and he was a ruler of the Aztec Empire, which up until the Spaniards came in and took him over. So basically Mexico as we know it now, and is the Aztec folk taken over by Spaniards.
They were colonized,
right? Spain. So honestly, I told Steve this off air. I did research this, but I can't pronounce a single word that. Yeah. So I'm going to do you a favor and not try to tell you about it.
And this gave me a chance to drop in some hot Mexico facts. Oh. So did you know Mexico has 68 official languages?
What?
Yeah. Something I learned about this. And also, Mexico also has more Spanish speakers than any other country. So there's more Spanish spoken in Mexico than there is actually in Spain.
Oh, because Spain has got the Portuguese and a lot more. But 68?
68.
Wow. Man, one more. That'd be really nice.
Yeah.
So Spanish, they colonized the Aztecs. And in revenge, as legend has it, Montezuma gives you diarrhea. Yeah. Gives white people or Europeans or basically non-Mexicans diarrhea.
So I think this is something kind of going back before with Mexican Standoff. I think that's I look at it as a positive thing. I could see this as being a pretty pejorative thing. But at the same time, it's fun to say. It's talking. I'm going to be glass half full of it. It's taking something you really don't want to talk about, which is, intestinal discomfort, and giving it a bit of a flair with the name.
Right. So, okay. So let's get to the real history here. So Montezuma II. So it's actually spelled Moctezuma II. Was the emperor of Mexico from 1502 to 1520. And he was the one in power when, as we said before, the Spanish began their conquest of the Aztec Empire. So during that time, as the Europeans, the Spanish were there, they began getting sick. And there are many terms for this, the runs, the trots, but more formally, traveler's diarrhea. And this is caused by drinking local water, eating food that you're not accustomed to. So this happens really anytime you change up your diet, right?
Right.
But it's also a bacterial illness that you can get caused by like E. coli, etc. So the whole revenge part comes from, as we mentioned before, the attitude that the colonized countries had toward the colonizers, and that's sort of a subtle way to get back at you. So yeah, it does make it more fun. But speaking of fun, here's a few names that really made me chuckle.
Okay.
That are similar to Montezuma's Revenge.
Okay.
So, it's not just for Spaniards. Oh no. There's the Gringo Gallop.
Mm-hmm.
The Aztec Two-Step.
Mm-hmm.
Gandhi's Revenge.
Now that sounds like a Quentin Tarantino movie that needs to be made. I'd watch that.
It sounds like, you remember in, what was the double feature they did with Death Proof, which I love, and the one before that. But they did the fake commercials.
Yeah.
I could see Gandhi's Revenge, right? My personal favorite, so this is if you suffer from this in Asia, is the Gandhi's Revenge. It's Delhi Belly. Or New Delhi Belly. The Rangoon Runs. Bombay Belly, just in case you're in Bombay. Jippy Tummy, which I don't know what a jippy, and if that's racist, I'm sorry. I don't know if it's from Egypt. The Cairo Two-Step. So basically just put the two-step behind anywhere you are. Pharaoh's Revenge, Mummy's Tummy.
So this is something you can move around to pretty much any country you go to.
Throw tummy behind it and you can do it. So like if you're not happy with, let's say you're some fancy fat cat from New York and you're traveling to the Midwest, you could easily have like, I don't know, what's a Midwestern town that rhymes with tummy? That's kind of hard to do. But, you could have like Topeka diarrhea or something. I don't know. So
is actually something you can get
at
Applebee's.
Exactly.
Similar to this, another hot Mexican fact is Mexico's home to the world's smallest volcano. In Pueblo, there is a 43-foot tall volcano you can visit.
43-foot tall volcano.
Yeah.
That's
so you might feel that way if you've been struck with Montezuma's Revenge.
Absolutely. So the first time this was used in writing that we could find, and speaking of the Midwest, was in the Indiana Evening Gazette in October of 1942. So again, it's relatively new. And it says Americans on duty overseas are learning to guard against, quote, Tehran tummy. I guess that's Iran. And Delhi belly. And then in Alan Moorehead's A Year of Battle in 1943, he sums it up. He says, quote, few set foot in Egypt without contracting jippy tummy. It recurs at irregular intervals and it makes you feel terrible. So, and then Montezuma's Revenge itself doesn't even come until 1959. In the Modesto Bee, it says, in Mexico, it sometimes is called the Aztec Curse, Montezuma's Revenge, and other colorful names. It can be either a mild or explosive illness. So there you go. Thank you for humoring me, Steve. I just wanted to be able to say, if you couldn't tell by my uncontrollable giggling, which I usually try to keep out,
right.
Delhi belly is pretty great. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you were to go to India right now and eat Indian food for 2 weeks, you're gonna be screwed in the belly area. So
yeah.
You got any more Mexico facts?
So a couple cool animals, and I well established, not a fan of animals. Some animals that are native to Mexico. The ocelot, which almost ocelot was kind of a badass looking looks like a tiny jaguar.
Oh, that's tight.
Something called the cotai, which looks like a raccoon, and I don't like this. It looks like an anteater and a raccoon got together. That's not going to end well.
No.
But also something that's just fun because it has Mexican in front of it is Mexican prairie dog.
Oh.
Which could be something that's a precursor to having Montezuma's Revenge. You start getting a Mexican prairie dog.
That's right. That reminds me of, I recently watched the movie, what's it called? The Race, something Race.
Oh, Rat Race.
I recently watched the movie Rat Race with my son. So, because I'm like, okay, what's a PG-13 movie that's legitimately funny?
Yeah.
And we watched that movie, and it's hilarious, and it's one of the few times in my mind that John Lovitz is actually funny.
Yeah. It's tough not to laugh when someone says "put down Hitler's lipstick."
Yeah, exactly. The whole Hitler thing is hilarious. Which that may be the first time that's ever been said in history, but
and hopefully the last.
Yes. So Rat Race is great, and there is the whole prairie dog in its scene, which hopefully you've experienced. So, all right, we're gonna bring this to a close. And some final thoughts about Mexico. Have you ever been to Mexico?
I have not.
You're too good for Mexico?
I've come close a few times. I've been to Arizona and California, and every time we mean to go down there, we haven't gone there.
Okay.
But things I've learned I like about Mexico: diversity of animals, tiny volcano, and no. I need a body bag.